Question 1. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a critical business application hosted on a VMware vSphere 7 X cluster is experiencing intermittent performance degradation, characterized by slow response times and high latency. Monitoring tools show elevated CPU and memory utilization on the hosts hosting the affected virtual machines, but the exact cause of the contention is not immediately apparent. What is the most professional and effective initial approach to address this situation? Option A. Acknowledge the performance alerts but defer investigation until the issue becomes more severe or impacts a wider range of services. Option B. Immediately migrate the virtual machines experiencing performance issues to different hosts within the cluster to alleviate resource contention on the current hosts. Option C. Conduct a detailed performance analysis of the affected virtual machines and the underlying host infrastructure, correlating resource utilization metrics with application behavior to identify the root cause of the contention before implementing any changes. Option D. Increase the CPU and memory resources allocated to the affected virtual machines to compensate for the perceived resource shortage. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed performance analysis of the affected virtual machines and the underlying host infrastructure, correlating resource utilization metrics with application behavior to identify the root cause of the contention before implementing any changes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualized environments where resource contention can impact critical application performance. The professional is tasked with resolving a performance degradation issue without a clear, immediate cause. The challenge lies in balancing the need for rapid resolution with the potential for unintended consequences of hasty actions, such as impacting other workloads or violating established operational procedures. The pressure to restore service quickly can lead to shortcuts that bypass proper analysis and risk management. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, data-driven investigation. This aligns with best professional practices for IT operations and aligns with the principles of responsible system management, which are implicitly expected within the VMware ecosystem. By first gathering performance metrics and analyzing resource utilization across the affected virtual machines and the underlying infrastructure, the professional can identify the root cause. This methodical approach ensures that any subsequent remediation steps are targeted and effective, minimizing the risk of introducing new problems. It also demonstrates due diligence and adherence to operational best practices, which are crucial for maintaining system stability and reliability. Incorrect approaches analysis. Immediately migrating the virtual machines to a different host without a thorough understanding of the resource contention is a premature and potentially disruptive action. This bypasses the critical step of diagnosing the underlying issue, which could be related to storage I/O, network congestion, or even a specific application process consuming excessive CPU. Such an action could simply shift the problem to another host, impacting different workloads, or fail to address the root cause entirely, leading to recurring performance issues. It represents a failure to apply a structured troubleshooting methodology. Another incorrect approach is to immediately increase the resource allocation, CPU or RAM, for the affected virtual machines. While this might temporarily alleviate the symptoms, it does not address the root cause of the resource contention. If the contention is due to an inefficient application or a misconfiguration, simply throwing more resources at the problem is an inefficient and costly solution. It also risks over-provisioning, which can lead to resource starvation for other VMs and a general degradation of host performance. This approach fails to adhere to principles of efficient resource management and proper capacity planning. Finally, ignoring the alerts and waiting for the issue to resolve itself is a passive and negligent approach. Performance degradation in critical systems is a clear indicator of a problem that requires attention. Delaying investigation can lead to more severe consequences, including extended downtime, data loss, and significant business impact. This approach violates the professional responsibility to monitor and maintain system health and proactively address issues. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes data collection and analysis before implementing solutions. This framework typically involves 1. Problem identification. Clearly define the observed issue, e.g., performance degradation. 2. Information gathering. Collect relevant metrics, logs, and alerts from the affected systems and infrastructure. 3. Hypothesis generation. Formulate potential causes for the observed problem based on the gathered information. 4. Testing and validation. Design and execute tests to confirm or refute the hypotheses. 5. Solution implementation. Based on validated hypotheses, implement the most appropriate and least disruptive solution. 6. Verification and monitoring. Confirm that the solution has resolved the issue and continue to monitor the system for recurrence or new problems. This systematic approach ensures that actions are informed, effective, and minimize risk. Question 2. The monitoring system demonstrates that several virtual machines hosted on a specific VMware vSphere 7 X host are experiencing significant performance degradation, including slow application response times and high latency. The host itself is reporting elevated CPU ready time and memory ballooning. What is the most appropriate initial course of action to diagnose and resolve this issue? Option A. Examine the CPU and memory utilization metrics of the affected vSphere host, specifically looking at CPU ready time and memory ballooning/swapping, to identify host-level resource contention, and then investigate individual virtual machines consuming excessive resources. Option B. Immediately initiate a vMotion of all virtual machines from the affected host to a different, healthy host to alleviate the immediate performance impact. Option C. Focus on analyzing the storage I/O latency for the data stores hosting the virtual machines, as this is a common cause of virtual machine performance issues. Option D. Investigate the performance metrics of each individual virtual machine, such as guest OS CPU and memory usage, to identify specific applications or processes causing the slowdown. The correct answer is A. Examine the CPU and memory utilization metrics of the affected vSphere host, specifically looking at CPU ready time and memory ballooning/swapping, to identify host-level resource contention, and then investigate individual virtual machines consuming excessive resources. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualized environments where performance degradation can have a cascading effect across multiple virtual machines and applications. The professional challenge lies in accurately diagnosing the root cause of the performance issue, which could stem from various layers of the vSphere infrastructure, including hardware, storage, networking, or the vSphere software itself. Misdiagnosing the issue can lead to wasted resources, prolonged downtime, and potential noncompliance with service-level agreements, SLAs, which are often implicitly or explicitly governed by organizational policies and potentially industry-specific best practices for IT service delivery. The need for swift and accurate resolution is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves systematically investigating the vSphere host resource utilization, specifically CPU and memory. High CPU ready time is a strong indicator of CPU contention at the host level, meaning that virtual machines are ready to run, but are waiting for CPU resources to become available. High memory ballooning or swapping indicates memory pressure on the host, forcing the hypervisor to reclaim memory from VMs or use slower disk-based swapping. By examining these metrics, the administrator can pinpoint whether the host itself is the bottleneck. If these metrics are elevated, the next logical step is to identify which specific virtual machines are consuming excessive resources. This methodical, layered approach, starting from the hypervisor and drilling down to individual VMs, aligns with best practices for troubleshooting performance issues in vSphere, ensuring that the most probable causes are addressed first. This systematic troubleshooting is crucial for maintaining the integrity and performance of the virtual infrastructure, which is a core responsibility in managing IT systems. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on individual virtual machine performance metrics without first assessing the host resource availability is an incomplete diagnostic strategy. While a VM might show high CPU or memory usage, this could be a symptom of a constrained host rather than an issue within the VM's operating system or applications. This approach risks misattributing the problem and implementing solutions at the VM level that will not resolve the underlying host contention. Immediately migrating all virtual machines to another host without proper analysis is a reactive and potentially disruptive measure. While it might temporarily alleviate the symptoms on the original host, it does not address the root cause. Furthermore, it can overload the destination host, potentially creating new performance issues or impacting other workloads. This approach lacks a structured diagnostic process and can lead to unnecessary operational overhead and risk. Investigating storage I/O latency as the primary cause without first confirming CPU or memory contention on the host is premature. While storage can be a significant performance bottleneck, it is not the only one. Jumping to storage analysis without ruling out other common causes like CPU or memory contention means that valuable time could be spent investigating the wrong area, delaying the resolution of the actual problem. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, layered troubleshooting methodology. This begins with assessing the health and resource utilization of the underlying infrastructure components, such as the vSphere host, before delving into individual virtual machine configurations. This approach minimizes the risk of misdiagnosis and ensures that the most likely causes of performance degradation are investigated first. When faced with performance issues, a professional decision-making process involves 1. Gathering initial symptoms and scope of the problem. 2. Formulating hypotheses based on common failure points. 3. Prioritizing hypotheses based on likelihood and impact. 4. Testing the highest priority hypotheses using appropriate monitoring and diagnostic tools. 5. Implementing solutions based on confirmed findings. 6. Verifying the resolution and documenting the process. This structured approach ensures efficiency, accuracy, and adherence to best practices for maintaining a stable and performant IT environment. Question 3. Investigation of a scenario where sensitive customer financial data is stored within virtual machines managed by VMware vSphere 7. X. The organization is subject to stringent data protection regulations, requiring robust controls over access and modification of this data. A team of system administrators and application developers requires access to these virtual machines for maintenance, troubleshooting, and application deployment. What is the most appropriate approach to ensure data integrity and compliance while enabling necessary operational access? Option A. Exclude the virtual machines containing sensitive data from standard vSphere access control policies, allowing direct access to the underlying storage for authorized personnel. Option B. Implement granular role-based access control (RBAC) within vSphere, assigning specific permissions to administrators and developers based on their job functions, and enable comprehensive logging and auditing of all access and modification activities related to the virtual machines containing sensitive data. Option C. Rely solely on endpoint security solutions installed on the virtual machines to protect the sensitive data, without implementing specific vSphere-level access controls or auditing. Option D. Grant broad administrative privileges to all system administrators and application developers who require access to the virtual machines, assuming they are trusted personnel. The correct answer is B. Implement granular role-based access control (RBAC) within vSphere, assigning specific permissions to administrators and developers based on their job functions, and enable comprehensive logging and auditing of all access and modification activities related to the virtual machines containing sensitive data. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the critical nature of data integrity and the potential for unauthorized access or modification within a virtualized environment. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need for robust security controls with the operational requirements of system administrators and developers who may need to access and manage sensitive data. Adhering to regulatory frameworks is paramount to ensure compliance, protect sensitive information, and maintain the trust of stakeholders. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a layered security strategy that aligns with common security principles and regulatory expectations for data protection. Implementing granular role-based access control (RBAC) ensures that only authorized individuals can perform specific actions on sensitive data, minimizing the risk of accidental or malicious compromise. Regular auditing and logging provide a transparent trail of all access and modification activities, which is crucial for forensic analysis, compliance reporting, and detecting suspicious behavior. This proactive and controlled approach directly addresses the regulatory imperative to safeguard sensitive data and maintain its integrity. An incorrect approach that involves granting broad administrative privileges to a wider group of users without sufficient justification or oversight is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This practice violates the principle of least privilege, a fundamental tenet of information security, and increases the attack surface. It makes it difficult to pinpoint responsibility for data breaches or unauthorized modifications, thereby failing to meet compliance requirements for accountability and auditability. Furthermore, it exposes sensitive data to a higher risk of compromise due to the increased number of potential access points and the reduced likelihood of detecting malicious activity amidst a flood of legitimate administrative actions. Another incorrect approach that neglects to implement any form of access control or auditing for sensitive data stored within vSphere virtual machines is equally problematic. This represents a direct failure to implement basic security controls mandated by most data protection regulations. The absence of access controls means that any user with access to the vSphere environment could potentially view, modify, or delete sensitive data, leading to severe data integrity issues and privacy violations. The lack of auditing means that any such incident would go undetected, making remediation impossible and leaving the organization vulnerable to regulatory penalties and reputational damage. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment to identify sensitive data and potential threats. This should be followed by the design and implementation of security controls that are proportionate to the identified risks, adhering to the principle of least privilege. Establishing clear policies and procedures for data access, modification, and retention is essential. Regular training for personnel on security best practices and regulatory requirements is also critical. Finally, continuous monitoring, auditing, and periodic review of security controls are necessary to adapt to evolving threats and maintain compliance. Question 4. System analysis indicates that a financial services organization is utilizing VMware vSphere 7X to host virtual machines containing sensitive customer financial data. The organization is subject to strict data retention and auditability regulations, requiring that all financial transaction data be retained for a minimum of 7 years and be readily accessible for regulatory audits. The IT operations team frequently uses vSphere snapshots as a quick method for reverting virtual machines to a previous state before performing software updates or configuration changes. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with the stated regulatory requirements while maintaining operational efficiency? Option A. Rely on vSphere snapshots for data retention, ensuring that snapshots are taken before any significant changes and are retained for the duration of the 7-year period. Periodically consolidate snapshots to manage storage space. Option B. Establish a policy that requires manual export of critical financial data from within the virtual machines to external storage devices on a quarterly basis and store these devices securely offsite. Option C. Configure vSphere to automatically delete all snapshots after 30 days to ensure a clean environment and rely on the underlying storage array's snapshots for data protection. Option D. Implement a robust, automated backup and archival solution that captures full VM backups at regular intervals, with a defined retention policy that aligns with the 7-year requirement. Regularly test the restore process and ensure that archived data is stored in a secure, immutable repository accessible for audits. The correct answer is D. Implement a robust, automated backup and archival solution that captures full VM backups at regular intervals, with a defined retention policy that aligns with the 7-year requirement. Regularly test the restore process and ensure that archived data is stored in a secure, immutable repository accessible for audits. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in virtualized environments, ensuring data integrity and compliance with regulatory requirements for sensitive data stored within virtual machines. The professional challenge lies in balancing the operational benefits of snapshotting with the stringent demands of data retention and auditability mandated by regulatory frameworks. Organizations must implement a strategy that not only maintains the operational health of their vSphere environment, but also satisfies legal and compliance obligations regarding data lifecycle management. The correct approach involves a comprehensive understanding of both VMware vSphere capabilities and the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the data being managed. This includes identifying data that falls under specific retention policies, understanding the implications of snapshotting on data immutability, and implementing a robust backup and archival strategy that aligns with these regulations. Best professional practice dictates a proactive, policy-driven approach that integrates compliance directly into the operational workflow, rather than treating it as an afterthought. This ensures that data is protected, accessible for audits, and disposed of according to legal mandates. Incorrect approaches often stem from a misunderstanding of how VMware features interact with regulatory mandates or from prioritizing operational convenience over compliance. For instance, relying solely on snapshots for long-term data retention is a significant regulatory failure. Snapshots are designed for short-term operational recovery and do not guarantee data immutability or meet the audit trail requirements of many regulations. This can lead to non-compliance, fines, and reputational damage. Similarly, neglecting to document and enforce data retention policies for virtual machine data or failing to regularly audit the effectiveness of backup and archival processes represents a failure to uphold professional responsibility and adhere to regulatory oversight. The professional decision-making process should involve a thorough risk assessment, identifying all relevant regulatory obligations, and then mapping these obligations to the technical capabilities and limitations of the vSphere environment. This requires collaboration between IT operations, legal counsel, and compliance officers, a phased implementation of controls, regular training for staff, and continuous monitoring of the environment against defined policies are crucial for maintaining a compliant and secure vSphere deployment. Question 5. Governance review demonstrates that while development teams are rapidly deploying new virtual machines and services within the VMware vSphere 7X environment, there is a lack of consistent adherence to the organization's established security and compliance policies, particularly concerning the handling of sensitive data. This has led to concerns about potential regulatory noncompliance. Which of the following approaches best addresses this governance gap while ensuring continued agility? Option A. Implement a trust but verify model where compliance is assumed unless specific issues are flagged by the development teams themselves. Option B. Rely solely on periodic manual audits conducted by the security team after resources have been deployed into production. Option C. Integrate automated compliance checks and policy enforcement directly into the CI/CD pipelines and infrastructure as code deployments. Option D. Allow development teams to bypass security and compliance reviews for faster deployment, with a commitment to address any issues retrospectively. The correct answer is C. Integrate automated compliance checks and policy enforcement directly into the CI/CD pipelines and infrastructure as code deployments. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualized environments where the rapid deployment of resources can outpace formal governance and compliance checks. The professional challenge lies in balancing the agility required by development teams with the imperative to maintain a secure and compliant infrastructure, especially when dealing with sensitive data. The need for strict adherence to regulatory frameworks, even in a dynamic cloud-native context, necessitates a proactive and integrated approach to security and compliance. Correct approach analysis. Implementing automated compliance checks within the CI/CD pipeline is the best professional practice. This approach embeds regulatory adherence directly into the development and deployment lifecycle by leveraging tools that scan configurations, code, and deployed resources against predefined compliance baselines, aligned with the specified regulatory framework. Potential violations are identified and remediated early, before they impact production or expose sensitive data. This proactive stance minimizes risk, reduces the cost of remediation, and ensures continuous compliance, which is a core tenet of robust governance and regulatory adherence. Incorrect approach is analysis. Allowing development teams to bypass security and compliance reviews for faster deployment creates a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach prioritizes speed over safety, directly contravening the principles of data protection and system integrity mandated by regulatory frameworks. It introduces a high risk of non-compliance, potential data breaches, and subsequent legal and financial repercussions. Relying solely on manual, post-deployment audits for compliance is also a failure. While audits are necessary, a purely reactive approach is insufficient in a dynamic environment. It allows non-compliant configurations to exist in production for a period, increasing the attack surface and the likelihood of regulatory violations. This method is inefficient, prone to human error, and fails to provide the continuous assurance required by modern governance standards. Implementing a trust but verify model where compliance is assumed unless issues are reported is a dangerous and professionally unacceptable approach. This model abdicates responsibility for proactive compliance management. It creates blind spots in the security posture and leaves the organization vulnerable to undetected noncompliance, which can have severe regulatory consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a risk-based, proactive approach to governance and compliance in virtualized environments. This involves integrating compliance requirements into every stage of the IT lifecycle, from design and development to deployment and operation. The decision-making process should prioritize automation for efficiency and accuracy, establish clear lines of responsibility, and foster a culture of security and compliance awareness across all teams. When faced with competing demands, the professional's primary duty is to uphold regulatory obligations and protect the organization from risk. Question 6. Stakeholder feedback indicates a critical business application requires immediate deployment on a new vSphere 7X environment. The development team has provided a proposed vSphere configuration, stating it is optimized for application performance. However, there are concerns that this configuration may not fully align with the organization's data protection policies and industry-specific regulatory compliance requirements. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure both timely deployment and regulatory adherence? Option A. Proceed with the deployment using the proposed configuration, relying on the development team's assurance of performance optimization and addressing compliance concerns post-deployment. Option B. Deploy the application with the proposed configuration based on the development team's recommendation, with a plan to have the security and compliance teams review it after the application is live. Option C. Implement the proposed vSphere configuration, assuming vendor default settings are sufficient for compliance and security. Option D. Conduct a thorough security and compliance review of the proposed vSphere configuration against organizational policies and regulatory mandates before proceeding with deployment. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough security and compliance review of the proposed vSphere configuration against organizational policies and regulatory mandates before proceeding with deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in enterprise IT environments where the need for rapid deployment of new services conflicts with the imperative to maintain regulatory compliance and data integrity. The pressure to deliver a new application quickly can lead to shortcuts that bypass established security and operational protocols. The professional challenge lies in balancing business agility with the non-negotiable requirements of data protection and system stability, especially when dealing with sensitive data. Failure to do so can result in significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review and validation of the proposed vSphere configuration against established security baselines and regulatory requirements before deployment. This includes verifying that all security controls, such as access management, encryption, and network segmentation, are correctly implemented and aligned with the organization's compliance obligations. This proactive stance ensures that the new application operates within a secure and compliant infrastructure, minimizing the risk of data breaches or non-compliance. It demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and responsible IT governance, which are fundamental to maintaining stakeholder confidence and adhering to industry best practices and any applicable data protection regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Deploying the application without a comprehensive security and compliance review of the vSphere configuration is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses critical risk assessment processes, potentially exposing sensitive data to unauthorized access or modification. This approach prioritizes speed over security and compliance, directly violating the principle of least privilege and the organization's duty to protect data. Implementing the configuration changes based solely on the vendor's default settings, without independent validation against organizational policies and regulatory mandates, is another failure. Vendor defaults are often designed for broad compatibility and may not meet specific security or compliance requirements. Relying on them without verification creates a false sense of security and leaves the organization vulnerable to compliance violations. accepting the configuration changes based on the assurance of the development team alone, without independent verification by the security and compliance teams, is a breakdown in internal controls. This creates a conflict of interest and bypasses the necessary checks and balances designed to ensure a secure and compliant environment. It undermines the principle of segregation of duties and the importance of independent oversight in critical IT operations. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a risk-based approach to IT operations. This involves understanding the potential impact of any change on security, compliance, and business continuity. When faced with pressure to deploy quickly, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying all applicable regulatory requirements and internal security policies. 2. Assessing the proposed changes against these requirements. 3. Engaging relevant stakeholders, security, compliance, legal, business units to ensure all perspectives are considered. 4. Prioritizing security and compliance as non-negotiable aspects of any deployment. 5. Documenting all decisions and the rationale behind them. 6. Implementing robust monitoring and auditing mechanisms post-deployment. Question 7. Assessment of the most appropriate method for configuring VMware vSphere 7. X logging to ensure compliance with data privacy regulations while maintaining effective operational monitoring and security auditing. Option A. Disable logging for all security-related events to avoid capturing any potentially sensitive information. Option B. Implement granular logging policies that specifically exclude sensitive data fields from vSphere logs. Option C. Rely solely on external security tools to redact sensitive information from logs after they have been generated. Option D. Enable verbose logging for all vSphere components without any filtering or anonymization. The correct answer is B. Implement granular logging policies that specifically exclude sensitive data fields from vSphere logs. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to data privacy and regulatory compliance within a VMware vSphere 7. X environment. The core difficulty lies in balancing the operational need for comprehensive logging with the legal and ethical obligations to protect sensitive customer data. Organizations are increasingly subject to stringent data protection regulations, and failure to comply can result in significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The challenge is to implement effective monitoring and auditing without inadvertently exposing or mishandling personally identifiable information, PI, or other sensitive data that might be captured in logs. This requires a nuanced understanding of both vSphere capabilities and applicable regulatory frameworks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves implementing granular logging policies that specifically exclude sensitive data fields from vSphere logs. This aligns with the principle of data minimization, a cornerstone of many data protection regulations. By configuring vSphere to log only necessary operational and security-relevant events, and actively filtering out PII or confidential information, an organization demonstrates a commitment to protecting data privacy. This proactive measure ensures that audit trails are maintained for security and operational troubleshooting without creating unnecessary risks of data exposure. This approach is best professional practice because it directly addresses regulatory requirements for data protection and privacy by design, minimizing the attack surface and the potential for breaches involving sensitive information. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to enable verbose logging for all vSphere components without any filtering or anonymization. This fails to adhere to data minimization principles and significantly increases the risk of logging sensitive data. If a log breach were to occur, the organization would be in direct violation of data protection laws, leading to severe consequences. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on external security tools to redact sensitive information from logs after they have been generated. While external tools can be part of a comprehensive strategy, this method is reactive rather than proactive. It still involves the initial capture of sensitive data, increasing the risk of exposure during transit or storage before redaction. Furthermore, it may not be foolproof, and the responsibility for ensuring complete redaction remains high. A third incorrect approach is to disable logging for all security-related events to avoid capturing any potentially sensitive information. This is a critical failure in security posture and regulatory compliance. Many regulations mandate robust auditing and logging of security events to detect and respond to threats. Disabling such logs leaves the organization vulnerable and unable to demonstrate compliance with security monitoring requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a risk-based approach to logging and auditing. This involves understanding the types of data that might be logged, the regulatory requirements applicable to that data, and the potential impact of a data breach. The decision-making process should prioritize implementing controls that prevent the logging of sensitive data in the first place, aligning with privacy by design principles. When sensitive data is unavoidable in logs, robust anonymization, pseudonymization, or encryption techniques should be employed, coupled with strict access controls to log repositories. Regular review and auditing of logging configurations and log content are essential to ensure ongoing compliance and security. Professionals should consult with legal and compliance teams to ensure their logging strategies meet all regulatory obligations. Question 8. Comparative studies suggest that when a new customer-facing application requires rapid deployment of virtual machines with sensitive customer data, a VMware vSphere administrator must navigate complex regulatory requirements concerning data residency and privacy. Which of the following actions best demonstrates a professional and compliant approach to provisioning storage for these new virtual machines? Option A. Deploy the virtual machines to a geographically dispersed storage solution to maximize availability, without explicitly verifying compliance with specific regional data protection mandates. Option B. Engage with the legal and compliance departments to understand specific data residency and privacy regulations applicable to the customer data, and then select a storage solution and configuration that meets these documented requirements. Following established change management procedures, Option C. Immediately provision the virtual machines using the fastest available storage array, assuming the vendor's documentation implies compliance with relevant data protection laws. Option D. Rely on the existing storage infrastructure's general compliance certifications and proceed with provisioning, deferring a detailed regulatory review until after the application is live. The correct answer is C. Immediately provision the virtual machines using the fastest available storage array, assuming the vendor's documentation implies compliance with relevant data protection laws. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid deployment of new services and the imperative to maintain regulatory compliance and data integrity within a virtualized environment. The need to quickly provision resources for a new customer-facing application, while simultaneously adhering to data residency and privacy regulations, requires a nuanced approach that balances agility with robust governance. Careful judgment is essential to avoid compromising sensitive data or violating legal obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape before implementing any technical solution. By engaging with legal and compliance teams, the administrator ensures that the chosen storage solution and data handling procedures align with the specific requirements of the data being processed and the jurisdictions involved. This proactive engagement mitigates the risk of non-compliance, which can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and legal repercussions. Adhering to established change management processes and conducting a risk assessment further solidifies this approach by ensuring that any technical implementation is well documented, tested, and approved, thereby safeguarding the integrity and security of the virtualized environment. An incorrect approach that bypasses compliance checks and directly implements a storage solution without regulatory review poses a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and could result in the unauthorized processing or storage of data in non-compliant locations, violating data residency laws. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on the vendor's claims of compliance without independent verification is also professionally unacceptable. This abdicates responsibility for due diligence and exposes the organization to risks if the vendor's claims are inaccurate or incomplete. Furthermore, implementing a solution without proper change management and risk assessment introduces instability and potential security vulnerabilities into the production environment, which is a failure of professional duty to maintain a secure and reliable infrastructure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant regulatory requirements and internal policies. This should be followed by a comprehensive risk assessment, considering the nature of the data, the intended use, and the potential impact of noncompliance. Engaging with legal, compliance, and security stakeholders early in the process is crucial. Technical solutions should then be evaluated against these requirements, with a preference for those that offer demonstrable compliance features and flexibility. Finally, all implementations must follow established change management protocols, including thorough testing and documentation, to ensure a controlled and compliant deployment. Question 9. Compliance review shows that a VMware vSphere 7 X environment is experiencing intermittent performance issues. To diagnose the problem, the support team needs to analyze system logs. The team is considering sharing these logs with a third-party vendor for analysis. What is the most appropriate action to ensure regulatory compliance and protect sensitive data? Option A. Share the logs with the vendor but require the vendor to sign a non-disclosure agreement (NDA) without any specific data redaction requirements. Option B. Share the raw, unredacted system logs with the vendor to provide them with the most complete diagnostic information. Option C. Redact or pseudonymize all personally identifiable information (PI) and sensitive system identifiers from the logs before sharing them with the vendor. Option D. Refuse to share any logs with the vendor, citing data privacy concerns, and attempt to resolve the issue internally without external assistance. The correct answer is C. Redact or pseudonymize all personally identifiable information (PI) and sensitive system identifiers from the logs before sharing them with the vendor. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing operational efficiency with stringent data privacy regulations. The core difficulty lies in determining the appropriate level of data anonymization or pseudonymization when sharing logs for troubleshooting purposes, ensuring that no personally identifiable information (PI) is inadvertently exposed while still retaining sufficient detail for effective problem resolution. The regulatory framework for this exam, 2V0-21, 20 Professional VMware vSphere 7 X, implicitly requires adherence to data protection principles, even if specific jurisdictional laws are not explicitly detailed within the syllabus itself. Best practice dictates a proactive and layered approach to data security. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes data minimization and pseudonymization. By redacting or masking sensitive fields before sharing logs, the organization adheres to the principle of processing only necessary data and protecting individual privacy. This aligns with the spirit of data protection regulations, which mandate that data be processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently, and that appropriate technical and organizational measures are in place to protect personal data. This method ensures that troubleshooting can occur without compromising the confidentiality of end users or violating potential data privacy mandates. An incorrect approach that involves sharing raw, unredacted logs is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This directly violates data privacy principles by exposing PII, which could lead to unauthorized access, identity theft, or other privacy breaches. Such an action would be considered negligent and could result in severe penalties, reputational damage, and legal repercussions, even if the specific jurisdiction's laws are not explicitly stated in the exam syllabus. Another incorrect approach, which is to refuse to share any logs at all, while seemingly safe, is also professionally deficient. It hinders effective troubleshooting, potentially leading to prolonged system downtime or unresolved issues, which can impact business operations and user satisfaction. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the balance between security and operational necessity. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk assessment. First, identify the types of data that might be present in the logs and assess their sensitivity. Second, determine the minimum data required for the intended purpose, troubleshooting. Third, implement technical controls to mask or remove sensitive data. Fourth, establish clear policies and procedures for log sharing, including who can access them and under what conditions. Finally, regularly review and update these procedures to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 10. To address the challenge of ensuring the security and stability of a newly deployed VMware vSphere 7 X environment, What is the most effective approach to risk assessment? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies critical assets, potential threats, existing vulnerabilities, and evaluates the likelihood and impact of risks, followed by prioritized mitigation strategies. Option B. Implement a standard set of security controls based on general industry best practices for VMware environments, without a specific assessment of the organization's unique risks. Option C. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to the VMware vendor or an external security consultancy without internal validation or oversight. Option D. Rely solely on automated vulnerability scanning tools to identify and report all potential security weaknesses within the vSphere 7X environment. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies critical assets, potential threats, existing vulnerabilities, and evaluates the likelihood and impact of risks, followed by prioritized mitigation strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. The scenario presents a common challenge in IT risk management, balancing the need for robust security controls with the operational demands of a dynamic virtualized environment. The challenge lies in accurately identifying and assessing risks associated with a new, complex VMware vSphere 7X deployment without disrupting ongoing business operations or incurring excessive costs. A superficial risk assessment could lead to either inadequate protection, leaving the organization vulnerable to threats, or overly restrictive controls that hinder productivity and innovation. Professional judgment is required to ensure the assessment is comprehensive, practical, and aligned with the organization's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, multifaceted risk assessment methodology that considers both technical vulnerabilities and business impact. This aligns with best practices in information security and IT governance, which are implicitly expected within professional VMware certifications. A thorough assessment would involve identifying critical assets, potential threats, e.g., unauthorized access, data breaches, service disruptions, existing vulnerabilities within the vSphere 7X environment, e.g., misconfigurations, unpatched components, and the likelihood and impact of these risks materializing. This approach allows for the prioritization of mitigation efforts based on their effectiveness and cost efficiency, ensuring that resources are allocated to address the most significant risks first. This aligns with the principle of due diligence in managing IT infrastructure. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on automated vulnerability scanning tools without contextualizing the findings. While valuable, these tools often generate a high volume of alerts, many of which may be false positives or low-priority issues in the specific operational context. Without expert analysis and correlation with business impact, this can lead to misallocation of resources and an incomplete understanding of actual risks. This fails to meet the professional standard of a comprehensive risk assessment. Another incorrect approach is to implement security controls based on industry best practice recommendations without a specific assessment of the organization's unique environment and threat landscape. While general best practices are a good starting point, they may not adequately address the specific risks faced by the organization or may impose unnecessary burdens. This approach lacks the tailored analysis required for effective risk management and could lead to compliance gaps or operational inefficiencies. A third incorrect approach is to defer risk assessment entirely to the vendor or external consultants without internal oversight and validation. While external expertise can be beneficial, the organization retains ultimate responsibility for its security posture. Relying solely on external parties without internal understanding and validation can lead to a disconnect between implemented controls and actual business needs, and may not fully satisfy internal governance requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured risk assessment framework that integrates technical analysis with business context. This involves defining the scope of the assessment, identifying assets and threats, analyzing vulnerabilities, evaluating risks, likelihood and impact, and developing mitigation strategies. The process should be iterative, with regular reviews and updates to reflect changes in the environment and threat landscape. Decision-making should be guided by a clear understanding of the organization's risk appetite, regulatory requirements, and business objectives, ensuring that security measures are proportionate and effective. Question 11. Process analysis reveals a critical, unpatched vulnerability has been identified in the VMware vCenter Server Appliance, VCSA 7X within the production environment. The vulnerability has a moderate exploitability score and could potentially allow unauthorized access to sensitive management functions. The IT security team is debating the immediate course of action to mitigate this risk. Which of the following approaches represents the most professionally sound and risk-informed decision-making process? Option A. Immediately disable all network access to the vCenter Server Appliance to prevent any possibility of external exploitation, accepting the temporary disruption to vSphere management. Option B. Defer any action until VMware releases an official patch for the identified vulnerability, assuming that the risk is low until a patch is available. Option C. Focus solely on the number of virtual machines managed by the vCenter Server Appliance, and if the number is below a predefined threshold, consider the risk to be acceptable without further investigation. Option D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to understand the specific impact of this vulnerability on critical business operations and sensitive data. Engage relevant stakeholders to discuss potential remediation strategies, and develop a phased plan that includes testing of any proposed solutions before full implementation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to understand the specific impact of this vulnerability on critical business operations and sensitive data. Engage relevant stakeholders to discuss potential remediation strategies, and develop a phased plan that includes testing of any proposed solutions before full implementation. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in IT risk management, balancing the need for robust security controls with the operational demands of a dynamic virtualized environment. The professional challenge lies in accurately assessing the risk posed by a new, unpatched vCenter Server Appliance, VCSA, vulnerability in a production environment. This requires a nuanced understanding of the potential impact, the likelihood of exploitation, and the effectiveness of existing mitigating controls, all within the context of VMware vSphere 7X best practices and potential regulatory compliance requirements. Careful judgment is needed to avoid both overreaction, which can disrupt critical services, and underreaction, which can expose the organization to significant security threats. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it follows a structured, evidence-based risk assessment methodology. It prioritizes understanding the specific vulnerability, its exploitability, and the potential impact on critical business functions and sensitive data. By engaging relevant stakeholders and considering the organization's risk tolerance, it ensures that the remediation strategy is proportionate and effective. This aligns with general IT security principles and the implicit requirement to maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems, which are foundational to many regulatory frameworks, even if not explicitly detailed in the exam scope. The focus on a phased remediation plan, including testing, demonstrates a commitment to minimizing disruption while addressing the risk. An incorrect approach that involves immediately disabling all network access to the VCSA without a thorough assessment fails to consider the operational impact and the principle of least privilege. This could lead to a complete service outage, violating the availability requirement and potentially causing significant business disruption. It also bypasses the need for a risk-based decision, opting for a blanket, potentially excessive, control. Another incorrect approach, which is to simply wait for a vendor patch without any interim mitigation, ignores the principle of proactive risk management. Waiting for a patch is often the ultimate solution. Failing to implement temporary measures when a vulnerability is known and potentially exploitable exposes the organization to unnecessary risk. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a passive approach to security, which can be ethically questionable and potentially non-compliant with security best practices. A third incorrect approach, which is to only consider the number of affected virtual machines as the sole risk factor, is insufficient. Risk is a function of impact, likelihood, and vulnerability. Focusing solely on the number of VMs overlooks the criticality of those VMs, the sensitivity of the data they process, and the exploitability of the vulnerability itself. This narrow focus can lead to misallocation of resources and an inaccurate understanding of the true risk posture. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Threat identification, understanding the nature of the vulnerability. 2. Impact assessment, determining the potential consequences of exploitation on business operations and data. 3. Likelihood assessment, evaluating the probability of the vulnerability being exploited in the current environment. 4. Control evaluation, assessing the effectiveness of existing security measures. 5. Risk determination, combining impact and likelihood to quantify the risk. 6. Mitigation strategy development, proposing proportionate and effective controls, including patching, workarounds, or compensating controls. 7. Stakeholder communication, engaging relevant parties to ensure buy-in and coordinated action. 8. Monitoring and review, continuously assessing the effectiveness of implemented controls. Question 12. What factors determine the necessary depth and scope of an impact assessment for a VMware vSphere 7X upgrade within a regulated financial services environment? Option A. The personal preference of the lead system administrator regarding the upgrade timeline and the perceived ease of the upgrade. Option B. The number of virtual machines to be upgraded and the availability of the IT team for the upgrade process. Option C. The vendor's release notes for vSphere 7X and the general industry trend towards cloud adoption. Option D. The criticality of the applications hosted on the vSphere environment, the complexity of the existing infrastructure, and the potential for disruption to business-critical financial transactions. The correct answer is D. The criticality of the applications hosted on the vSphere environment, the complexity of the existing infrastructure, and the potential for disruption to business-critical financial transactions. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT infrastructure management, balancing the need for rapid deployment with the imperative of thorough impact assessment. The professional challenge lies in the inherent tension between speed and diligence. A rushed deployment without proper impact analysis risks unforeseen consequences, potentially leading to service disruptions, security vulnerabilities, or compliance breaches. Conversely, an overly protracted assessment can delay critical business initiatives. Therefore, careful judgment is required to identify the most pertinent factors that influence the scope and depth of the impact assessment. The correct approach prioritizes a systematic evaluation of how the proposed vSphere 7X upgrade will affect existing systems, applications, and business processes. This involves identifying all dependencies, potential conflicts, and resource implications. By focusing on these critical elements, the organization can proactively mitigate risks, ensure compatibility, and minimize disruption. This aligns with best professional practices that emphasize risk management and operational stability. In a professional VMware context, this methodical approach is crucial for maintaining the integrity and performance of the virtualized environment, directly impacting business continuity and service delivery. Incorrect approaches fail to adequately address the multifaceted nature of an infrastructure upgrade. Focusing solely on technical compatibility without considering application dependencies or business process integration overlooks critical areas where negative impacts can manifest. Similarly, prioritizing speed over a comprehensive assessment, or conversely, conducting an assessment that is excessively broad and time-consuming without clear risk-based prioritization, can lead to suboptimal outcomes. These approaches can result in regulatory noncompliance if, for example, data integrity or availability requirements are not met due to unforeseen upgrade side effects. Ethically, a failure to conduct a proper impact assessment can be seen as negligence, potentially harming the business and its stakeholders. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a risk-based methodology. First, clearly define the scope and objectives of the proposed change. Second, identify all potential stakeholders and their concerns. Third, systematically assess the potential impacts across technical, operational, and business domains. Fourth, develop mitigation strategies for identified risks. Finally, establish a clear communication plan and rollback strategy. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, risks are managed, and the organization can proceed with confidence. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates a newly disclosed critical vulnerability affecting a core component of the VMware vSphere 7X environment. The vulnerability has been assigned a high CVSS score, but its exploitability in the specific production environment, which includes custom configurations and limited external exposure, is not immediately clear. Which of the following represents the most professionally sound approach to managing this risk? Option A. Defer any action until the vendor releases a secondary update or further exploit details emerge, assuming the vulnerability is unlikely to be exploited in the current environment due to its isolation. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to understand the specific exploitability and potential impact of the vulnerability within the organization's unique vSphere 7X deployment before determining the appropriate remediation strategy. Option C. Immediately deploy a vendor-provided patch to all affected vSphere components to eliminate the risk, prioritizing speed over further analysis. Option D. Rely on the high CVSS score as definitive proof of immediate and severe risk, and proceed with a full rollback of the affected vSphere components until a more stable solution is available. The correct answer is C. Immediately deploy a vendor-provided patch to all affected vSphere components to eliminate the risk, prioritizing speed over further analysis. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in IT risk management, balancing the need for robust security controls with the operational realities of a dynamic virtualized environment. The professional challenge lies in accurately assessing the risk posed by a newly identified vulnerability without succumbing to either overreaction or complacency. This requires a nuanced understanding of the vulnerability potential impact, the existing security posture, and the specific context of the VMware vSphere 7X environment. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it follows a systematic and evidence-based methodology for risk assessment. It prioritizes understanding the specific threat landscape and the potential impact on critical assets before implementing controls. This aligns with general IT security best practices and regulatory expectations that mandate a risk-informed approach to security. Specifically, it emphasizes the principle of proportionality, applying controls commensurate with the identified risk. This approach is ethically sound, as it aims to protect organizational assets and data effectively without incurring unnecessary costs or operational disruptions. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate patching without a proper risk assessment fails to consider the potential for unintended consequences or the possibility that the vulnerability might not pose a significant threat in the specific deployment. This could lead to unnecessary downtime, resource expenditure, and operational instability, violating the principle of due diligence in managing IT resources. It also fails to demonstrate a reasoned, risk-based decision-making process, which is often a requirement in IT governance frameworks. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the vulnerability without any investigation is professionally negligent. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to basic security hygiene and a disregard for potential threats. Such an approach could lead to significant security breaches, data loss, and reputational damage, representing a clear ethical and professional failure to protect the organization's interests. It ignores the fundamental responsibility to investigate and mitigate potential risks. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This typically includes identifying assets, identifying threats and vulnerabilities, analyzing the likelihood and impact of a threat exploiting a vulnerability, determining the level of risk, and then selecting appropriate mitigation strategies. Professionals should always seek to understand the context of the vulnerability within their specific environment, consult threat intelligence, and engage with relevant stakeholders before making decisions about remediation. This ensures that actions taken are proportionate, effective, and aligned with organizational objectives and regulatory requirements. Question 14. Consider a scenario where a critical security vulnerability is identified in a VMware vSphere 7X component that is integral to the organization's production environment. The vendor has released a patch, but the deployment process for this specific patch is known to be complex and has historically caused intermittent issues in similar environments. The IT operations team is under pressure to remediate the vulnerability quickly to minimize exposure. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for managing this risk? Option A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to evaluate the potential impact of the vulnerability and the patch, develop a detailed deployment and rollback plan, and communicate the plan to stakeholders before applying the patch in a controlled manner. Option B. Defer patching indefinitely, assuming the likelihood of exploitation in this specific environment is low, and the risk of patching is higher than the risk of the vulnerability. Option C. Escalate the issue to senior management with a request for guidance on how to proceed, without conducting any initial technical assessment or proposing solutions. Option D. Immediately apply the patch to the production environment to eliminate the security risk as quickly as possible, accepting the potential for minor disruptions. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to evaluate the potential impact of the vulnerability and the patch, develop a detailed deployment and rollback plan, and communicate the plan to stakeholders before applying the patch in a controlled manner. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining operational continuity and adhering to security best practices, especially when faced with a critical vulnerability. The need for rapid remediation must be balanced against the potential for unintended consequences that could impact system stability or data integrity. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that mitigates risk effectively without introducing new, equally or more severe risks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured and documented risk assessment process. This aligns with general IT governance principles and the implicit requirements of responsible system management, which emphasize understanding the impact of changes before implementation. By involving stakeholders and documenting the decision-making process, this approach ensures accountability, facilitates knowledge sharing, and provides a clear audit trail. This proactive stance is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and compliance with organizational policies and potentially industry standards for secure system administration, even if specific regulations are not explicitly cited for this exam's jurisdiction. An incorrect approach that involves immediately applying the patch without any prior assessment fails to acknowledge the potential for unforeseen compatibility issues or performance degradation. This bypasses essential risk management steps and could lead to system downtime or data corruption, violating the professional obligation to maintain system stability and integrity. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential negative impact on users and the organization. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the vulnerability due to the perceived low risk of exploitation, is professionally unacceptable. It represents a failure to proactively manage security threats and can be construed as negligence. This decision, if not supported by a thorough, documented risk assessment that clearly articulates the rationale and accepts the residual risk, leaves the organization exposed to potential breaches. This can have significant financial and reputational consequences, and demonstrates a lack of commitment to security best practices. A further incorrect approach, which is to escalate the issue to a higher authority without providing any initial analysis or proposed mitigation, delays the resolution process unnecessarily. While escalation is sometimes appropriate, it should be informed by an initial assessment of the problem and potential solutions. Without this, it places an undue burden on higher management and prolongs the period of vulnerability. Professionally, this indicates a lack of initiative and problem-solving skills. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, understand the nature and severity of the vulnerability. Second, assess the potential impact on the specific vSphere environment, considering dependencies and critical services. Third, identify and evaluate potential mitigation strategies, including patching, configuration changes, or compensating controls. Fourth, document the chosen approach, including the rationale, any risks accepted, and the plan for implementation and verification. Finally, communicate the plan and its outcomes to relevant stakeholders. Question 15. The investigation demonstrates that a new vSphere 7X feature, designed to enhance storage performance through direct memory access, is being considered for deployment across the production environment. However, concerns have been raised regarding potential security implications that are not fully understood by the implementation team. What is the most appropriate initial step to ensure the secure and effective integration of this feature? Option A. Prioritize the performance benefits of the new feature and implement it immediately, addressing any security issues that arise post-deployment. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats, vulnerabilities, and the impact of the new feature on the existing security posture, and develop mitigation strategies. Option C. Proceed with the implementation of the new feature, relying on the default security configurations provided by VMware, and monitor for any immediate security alerts. Option D. Focus the assessment solely on the technical specifications of the feature, assuming that any security concerns are outside the scope of the implementation team's responsibility. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats, vulnerabilities, and the impact of the new feature on the existing security posture, and develop mitigation strategies. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a critical need for a robust risk assessment process when implementing new technologies within a virtualized environment. The challenge lies in balancing the benefits of advanced features with the potential security vulnerabilities they introduce. A thorough risk assessment is not merely a procedural step, but a fundamental requirement for maintaining the integrity and security of the virtual infrastructure, aligning with best practices for data protection and operational resilience. The correct approach involves a systematic identification of potential threats and vulnerabilities associated with the new vSphere 7X features, followed by an evaluation of their likelihood and impact. This process should lead to the development of appropriate mitigation strategies, such as enhanced access controls, network segmentation, or specific security configurations. This aligns with the principle of proactive risk management, which is essential for compliance with general IT security best practices and any applicable data protection regulations that mandate safeguarding sensitive information. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the implementation without a comprehensive risk assessment, assuming that the vendor's default security settings are sufficient. This bypasses the crucial step of understanding the specific threat landscape relevant to the organization's environment and the particular features being deployed. Such an oversight could lead to the introduction of exploitable weaknesses, potentially resulting in data breaches, service disruption, or unauthorized access, all of which carry significant operational and reputational consequences. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the performance benefits of the new features, neglecting the security implications. This demonstrates a failure to adopt a holistic view of technology implementation, where security must be an integral consideration from the outset. This can lead to a situation where the pursuit of efficiency inadvertently creates significant security risks, undermining the overall stability and trustworthiness of the IT infrastructure. A third incorrect approach involves conducting a superficial risk assessment that only identifies obvious threats, ignoring more subtle or complex vulnerabilities. This lack of depth in the assessment process means that critical risks may go unaddressed, leaving the environment susceptible to sophisticated attacks. It highlights a deficiency in the analytical rigor required for effective risk management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured methodology for risk assessment. This includes defining the scope of the assessment, identifying assets and threats, analyzing vulnerabilities, evaluating risks, likelihood, and impact, and developing response plans. Professionals must also consider the organization's specific risk appetite and regulatory obligations. Continuous monitoring and review of identified risks are also paramount to ensure that the risk posture remains appropriate over time. Question 16. Upon reviewing the resource utilization of several XE7X hosts, a virtualization administrator identifies that some hosts are licensed based on a higher number of physical CPU cores than are currently being utilized by virtual machines. To optimize licensing costs, the administrator considers disabling hyperthreading and reducing the number of visible CPU cores presented to the XE hypervisor through BIOS settings on these hosts. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance and best practice? Option A. Consult VMware's official licensing documentation and engage with VMware or a certified partner to understand the precise licensing implications of reducing visible CPU cores before making any changes. Option B. Implement the changes to reduce visible CPU cores and monitor for any immediate alerts from VMware's licensing compliance tools. Option C. Assume that reducing the number of cores presented to XE will automatically adjust the licensing requirements without further verification. Option D. Proceed with disabling hyperthreading and reducing visible CPU cores in the BIOS, as this will directly lower the licensed core count and reduce costs. The correct answer is A. Consult VMware's official licensing documentation and engage with VMware or a certified partner to understand the precise licensing implications of reducing visible CPU cores before making any changes. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualized environments, balancing performance optimization with resource allocation and potential licensing implications. The professional challenge lies in understanding the nuances of vSphere licensing, particularly around CPU core counts, and how they impact the cost and compliance of a virtualized infrastructure. Making an incorrect decision can lead to significant financial penalties or noncompliance with VMware's licensing agreements, which are critical for maintaining a legally sound and operationally stable environment. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of VMware's licensing model for vSphere 7X, which is typically per CPU socket with a core-based component. Best professional practice dictates that, before implementing any changes that could affect the perceived or actual CPU core count of a host, a detailed review of the current licensing status and the implications of the proposed change must be conducted. This includes consulting the official VMware licensing documentation and, if necessary, engaging with VMware or a certified partner to ensure accurate interpretation and compliance. The goal is to maintain the correct number of licensed cores to avoid under-licensing, which is a direct violation of the End-User License Agreement, EULA. An incorrect approach would be to assume that simply reducing the number of visible cores to the hypervisor through BIOS settings or other means would negate the need for licensing those cores. This is a regulatory failure because VMware's licensing is based on the physical cores present in the CPU sockets installed in the host, regardless of how many are presented to the hypervisor. Attempting to circumvent this by manipulating core visibility is a breach of the EULA and can be considered a form of misrepresentation. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the change based on anecdotal evidence or assumptions without verifying with official documentation or licensing experts. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adhere to professional standards of care, potentially leading to compliance issues. The professional decision-making process should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the proposed change and its potential impact on the virtualized environment. 2. Consult official VMware documentation regarding vSphere 7X licensing, specifically focusing on CPU and core licensing models. 3. Assess the current licensing status against the proposed change. 4. If there is any ambiguity or potential for noncompliance, seek clarification from VMware or a trusted VMware licensing partner. 5. Document the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action, ensuring it aligns with licensing agreements and best practices. Question 17. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive evaluation of existing vSphere 7X infrastructure capabilities and potential impacts before deploying a new, resource-intensive application that handles sensitive customer data. Which approach best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory considerations for such a deployment? Option A. Immediately provision the necessary virtual machines and allocate resources based on the application vendor's minimum specifications to meet the urgent business demand, deferring any detailed analysis until after the application is live. Option B. Focus primarily on minimizing the cost of the new deployment by utilizing existing, underutilized resources, even if it means slightly compromising the performance guarantees for the new application and existing critical services. Option C. Conduct a detailed performance and resource utilization analysis of the current vSphere environment, identify potential resource contention points, and design a deployment strategy that ensures adequate resources are allocated while maintaining the performance and security of existing workloads, adhering to any relevant data protection regulations. Option D. Deploy the application using a standard, generic virtual machine configuration, assuming that the existing security and compliance controls within the vSphere environment are sufficient for all types of workloads, regardless of data sensitivity. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed performance and resource utilization analysis of the current vSphere environment, identify potential resource contention points, and design a deployment strategy that ensures adequate resources are allocated while maintaining the performance and security of existing workloads, adhering to any relevant data protection regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing the immediate need for resource allocation with the long-term strategic goals of a virtualized environment. The challenge lies in ensuring that decisions made under pressure do not compromise the integrity, performance, or compliance of the vSphere 7X infrastructure, especially when dealing with sensitive data or regulated workloads. Careful judgment is required to align technical solutions with overarching business objectives and regulatory mandates. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough assessment of the existing environment and the specific requirements of the new workload. This aligns with the principles of responsible IT management and adherence to best practices for virtual infrastructure deployment. By evaluating resource utilization, performance baselines, and potential impacts on existing services, it ensures that the new deployment is sustainable and does not introduce instability or security vulnerabilities. This proactive and analytical method is crucial for maintaining a robust and compliant vSphere environment, reflecting a commitment to operational excellence and risk mitigation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on rapid deployment without considering the broader implications fails to uphold professional responsibility. This could lead to resource contention, performance degradation for existing critical applications, and potential security gaps if proper isolation or access controls are not implemented. Such an approach risks violating internal policies and potentially external regulations concerning data security and service availability. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes cost savings above all else, even at the expense of adequate performance or resilience, is also professionally unacceptable. This can result in a system that is unable to meet the demands of the workload, leading to business disruptions and potential noncompliance with service-level agreements, SLAs, or regulatory requirements for uptime and data integrity. A third incorrect approach that ignores the specific compliance needs of the new workload, assuming a one-size-fits-all configuration, is a significant ethical and professional failing. This can expose the organization to severe penalties, data breaches, and reputational damage if the workload is subject to specific data handling or security standards that are not met. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured evaluation framework. This includes understanding the business requirements, assessing the current infrastructure's capacity and capabilities, identifying any regulatory or compliance constraints, evaluating potential technical solutions against these criteria, and finally, implementing the chosen solution with appropriate testing and validation. Prioritizing a holistic view that encompasses performance, security, compliance, and cost-effectiveness is paramount. Question 18. Examination of the data shows that a critical virtual machine in a production vSphere 7X environment is exhibiting signs of data corruption, impacting application functionality. The last successful backup of this virtual machine was completed 24 hours ago. The immediate business impact is significant, and a rapid resolution is required. Option A. Delete the affected virtual machine and its associated data, assuming the corruption is isolated and will not impact other systems, and plan to rebuild the application from scratch if necessary. Option B. Attempt to repair the data corruption in place on the live virtual machine by applying available patches or diagnostic tools without taking a backup first. Option C. Restore the virtual machine from the most recent successful backup to a separate, isolated test environment. Thoroughly test the application and data integrity within this isolated environment. Once verified as clean and functional, proceed with a planned restore to the production environment, ensuring proper rollback procedures are in place. Option D. Immediately initiate a restore of the virtual machine directly back into the production environment using the most recent successful backup, prioritizing speed of recovery over verification. Correct answer is C. Restore the virtual machine from the most recent successful backup to a separate, isolated test environment. Thoroughly test the application and data integrity within this isolated environment. Once verified as clean and functional, proceed with a planned restore to the production environment, ensuring proper rollback procedures are in place. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualized environments, ensuring data integrity and availability while adhering to operational best practices and potential regulatory compliance requirements, even if not explicitly stated for this exam. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for system recovery with the long-term implications of data corruption, and the potential for regulatory scrutiny if data loss or compromise occurs. A robust backup and recovery strategy is not merely a technical task, but a critical component of business continuity and risk management. The correct approach, which involves restoring from a verified recent backup to a separate, isolated environment for testing before production deployment, represents best professional practice. This method directly addresses the core problem of potential data corruption by providing a known good state. The isolation step is crucial to prevent the corrupted data from further impacting the production environment or the backup infrastructure itself. This practice aligns with general IT governance principles that emphasize data integrity, disaster recovery, and minimizing downtime, all of which are implicitly expected in professional IT operations. An incorrect approach that involves immediately attempting to restore the affected virtual machine directly back into the production environment without verification is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses essential validation steps, risking the reintroduction of corruption into the live system and potentially causing further data loss or application failure. This could lead to significant business disruption and reputational damage. From a regulatory or ethical standpoint, this demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence in protecting data and ensuring system stability, which could be viewed as negligence if specific compliance frameworks were in place that mandate data integrity and recovery assurance. Another incorrect approach, which is to simply delete the affected virtual machine and assume the issue is resolved, is also professionally unsound. This ignores the root cause of the corruption and the potential for it to be a symptom of a larger underlying problem within the storage or hypervisor infrastructure. It also fails to account for any critical data that may have been lost or compromised on that specific virtual machine, leaving a gap in data availability and potentially violating data retention policies or business requirements. This approach demonstrates a lack of thorough investigation and a failure to implement a comprehensive recovery plan. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a structured incident response. First, contain the issue by isolating the affected system. Second, assess the extent of the problem and identify the likely cause. Third, consult available recovery options, prioritizing methods that ensure data integrity and minimize risk. Fourth, execute the chosen recovery strategy in a controlled manner, including verification and testing. Finally, conduct a post-incident review to understand the root cause and implement preventative measures. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are data-driven, risk-aware, and aligned with best practices for maintaining a stable and reliable IT infrastructure. Question 19. Performance analysis shows a specific virtual machine experiencing intermittent high latency and slow response times. The virtual machine is hosted on a vSphere 7X cluster. What is the most appropriate initial step to diagnose the root cause of this performance degradation? Option A. Reconfigure the virtual machine's network adapter settings to a different type. Option B. Analyze vSphere performance metrics for the virtual machine and its host within vCenter server. Option C. Disable vSphere high availability for the entire cluster to isolate the issue. Option D. Immediately migrate the virtual machine to a different host in the same cluster. The correct answer is B. Analyze vSphere performance metrics for the virtual machine and its host within vCenter server. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualized environments where performance metrics can be influenced by numerous factors, including underlying hardware, network conditions, and the configuration of the vSphere environment itself. The professional challenge lies in accurately diagnosing the root cause of the performance degradation without making assumptions or implementing changes that could negatively impact other services or violate established operational procedures. It requires a systematic approach to data gathering and analysis, prioritizing non-disruptive investigation methods. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice in this situation involves a methodical, data-driven investigation that begins with analyzing the vSphere performance metrics within the vCenter server. This approach is best because it directly leverages the tools and data provided by the vSphere platform itself, which are designed for monitoring and troubleshooting. It allows for the identification of resource contention, CPU, memory, disk I/O, network, at the virtual machine and host levels. This aligns with best practices for IT service management, emphasizing root cause analysis and minimizing service disruption. By examining vSphere metrics first, the administrator can determine if the issue is internal to the virtualized environment before considering external factors, thereby adhering to principles of efficient troubleshooting and resource management. Incorrect approaches analysis. Immediately migrating the virtual machine to a different host without thorough investigation is professionally unacceptable. This action bypasses the critical step of root cause analysis. It could mask the underlying problem, potentially leading to similar issues on the new host, and it risks impacting the performance of other virtual machines on the destination host without a clear justification. This approach violates the principle of responsible system administration and could be seen as a failure to exercise due diligence in troubleshooting. Reconfiguring the virtual machine's network adapter settings without first analyzing network performance metrics is also professionally unsound. Network adapter settings are typically stable unless there's a known issue or a specific configuration change planned. Altering these settings without data to support the change is speculative and could introduce new problems or exacerbate existing ones. This deviates from a systematic troubleshooting methodology and could be considered a breach of operational best practices. Disabling vSphere HA, high availability, for the cluster to isolate the virtual machine is a drastic and inappropriate step. HA is a critical feature for ensuring service continuity. Disabling it without a compelling, data-backed reason to suspect HA itself is causing the performance issue is a significant operational risk. It exposes all virtual machines in the cluster to potential downtime if a host fails, which is contrary to the fundamental goals of a robust virtual infrastructure. This action demonstrates a lack of understanding of the impact of disabling core vSphere features and a failure to prioritize service availability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach performance issues by first establishing a baseline and then systematically analyzing available data. The decision-making process should prioritize non-disruptive diagnostic steps. When performance degradation is observed, the initial focus should be on the immediate environment where the issue is reported. In a vSphere context, this means leveraging vCenter servers' performance monitoring capabilities. If vSphere metrics do not reveal a clear cause, the investigation can then expand to the underlying physical infrastructure, network, and storage. Any proposed remediation steps should be based on evidence gathered during the analysis phase and should include an assessment of potential impact on other services. Question 20. When evaluating the risk of application unavailability for a critical business application hosted on VMware vSphere 7, which of the following approaches best aligns with professional risk assessment best practices for ensuring business continuity? Option A. Postpone the comprehensive risk assessment and disaster recovery planning until after a significant outage has occurred to learn from real-world failures. Option B. Conduct a detailed assessment of the application's recovery time, objective RTO, and recovery point objective RPO, analyze its business impact, and then design a disaster recovery strategy tailored to these specific requirements. Option C. Develop a generic disaster recovery plan that applies the same recovery procedures and timelines to all applications within the vSphere environment. Option D. Implement a full replication of all virtual machines in the environment to a secondary site, regardless of their criticality, to ensure comprehensive data protection. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed assessment of the application's recovery time, objective RTO, and recovery point objective RPO, analyze its business impact, and then design a disaster recovery strategy tailored to these specific requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge in a virtualized environment by requiring a risk assessment for a critical application's availability. The challenge lies in balancing the need for robust disaster recovery with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the potential impact of downtime on business operations. Careful judgment is required to identify and prioritize risks that could lead to application unavailability, ensuring that mitigation strategies are both effective and cost-efficient. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it systematically identifies potential threats to application availability, assesses their likelihood and impact, and then prioritizes mitigation efforts based on the criticality of the application. This aligns with general IT governance principles and the need for business continuity planning, which are implicitly supported by regulatory frameworks that mandate data protection and service availability. By focusing on the specific application's RTO/RPO and its business impact, this approach ensures that resources are allocated where they are most needed, minimizing the risk of significant business disruption. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on replicating all virtual machines without a clear understanding of their criticality fails to prioritize effectively. This can lead to over-provisioning of resources, increased costs, and potentially a less resilient overall infrastructure if critical systems are not adequately protected due to resource constraints. This approach is professionally unacceptable as it lacks a risk-based methodology, potentially violating principles of efficient resource management and failing to meet the specific availability requirements of the most critical business function. Another incorrect approach that relies on a generic, one-size-fits-all disaster recovery plan for all applications overlooks the unique requirements and business impact of individual services. This can result in either insufficient protection for critical applications or excessive protection for non-critical ones, both of which are professionally suboptimal. It fails to demonstrate due diligence in understanding the specific risk landscape for each application and its role within the organization. A further incorrect approach that postpones the risk assessment until after a disaster has occurred is fundamentally flawed and professionally negligent. This reactive stance ignores the proactive nature of risk management and business continuity. It demonstrates a failure to anticipate potential problems and implement preventative measures, which can lead to severe business disruption, financial losses, and reputational damage. Such an approach would likely be viewed as a failure to meet professional standards of care and could have significant regulatory implications if service availability is mandated. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment methodology. This begins with identifying critical assets and their dependencies, followed by threat identification and vulnerability analysis. Subsequently, the likelihood and impact of identified risks are assessed to determine the overall risk level. Mitigation strategies are then developed and prioritized, considering cost-effectiveness and alignment with business objectives. Finally, the effectiveness of these strategies is regularly reviewed and tested to ensure ongoing resilience.